The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department as Deputy Marcus Kellerman stared at the emergency dispatch screen. 3 words glowed in red letters that would change everything: armed hostage situation. What he didn't know was that in less than 4 hours, he'd be pointing his service weapon at a desperate father, listening to words that would shatter every assumption he'd ever made about right and wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came in at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other in the small town of Cedar Falls, Oregon. Marcus had been reviewing incident reports when the radio crackled to life with dispatcher Janet Morrison's urgent voice cutting through the static. All units, we have a 10-54 in progress at 1247 Maple Street. An armed individual has barricaded himself inside a residence with family members. Neighbors report gunshots fired. Requesting immediate backup and crisis negotiation team. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Maple Street was in the Willowbrook subdivision, a quiet neighborhood where the biggest crime was usually teenagers spray painting the water tower. He grabbed his radio, already moving toward his patrol car. Unit 47 responding, ETA 4 minutes. The rain had turned the street slick, and Marcus navigated carefully through the winding roads that led to Willowbrook. His mind raced through protocols, trying to prepare for whatever scene awaited him. In his 8 years with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, he'd handled domestic disputes, robbery calls, and even a bank standoff 2 years prior. But something about this call felt different. The dispatcher's voice had carried an edge. He'd rarely heard Dot as he turned onto Maple Street. Marcus could see the chaos already unfolding. 3 patrol cars were positioned strategically around a modest 2-story colonial house with blue shutters. The front yard, usually pristine according to the neighbors now gathered behind police tape, showed signs of disturbance. A garden gnome lay shattered near the mailbox, and the front door hung partially open, revealing only darkness beyond. Sheriff Patricia Donovan was already on scene, coordinating with the other deputies. At 52, she commanded respect through 26 years of law enforcement experience, and Marcus had never seen her rattled. Today was different. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern as she briefed him on the situation. "We've got Thomas Brennan, 44 years old, construction foreman at Hartwell Industries. His wife called 911 20 minutes ago. Said he'd been drinking since yesterday and became violent when their daughter came home from school. The wife managed to get out, but the daughter's still inside." Marcus scanned the house, noting the drawn curtains and the eerie silence that had settled over the scene. "Any communication with him? He's not answering the phone. We heard 2 shots about 10 minutes ago, but no movement since then. The crisis team is 20 minutes out, but we can't wait that long if the girl's in immediate danger." The girl. Marcus looked across the street where a woman in a torn blue sweater sat in the back of an ambulance, being tended to by paramedic Linda Walsh. Even from a distance, he could see the bruising on her face and the way her hands shook. As she spoke to the EMTA, this was Sarah Brennan, Thomas's wife of 19 years, and her world was collapsing in real time. Marcus approached the ambulance carefully. Sarah looked up with red-rimmed eyes that held a mixture of fear and desperation he'd seen too often in his line of work. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm Deputy Kellerman. Can you tell me about your daughter? Is she hurt?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Emma, she's 17. She came home from school and told us." She stopped, struggling with words that seemed too heavy to speak. "She told us she's pregnant. Thomas, he just ... He lost it completely, started screaming, throwing things." Emma ran upstairs to her room, and Thomas followed with his hunting rifle. The pieces began forming a picture that made Marcus's chest tighten. A teenage pregnancy announcement, an angry father with a weapon, and a young girl trapped upstairs with nowhere to run. He'd seen how quickly these situations could turn. Tragic. Has your husband ever threatened Emma before? Never with violence, but... Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked through. He's been different lately. Lost his job 3 months ago, been drinking more. When Emma told us about the baby, he kept saying she'd ruined everything, that she'd destroyed the family name. He grabbed his rifle from the gun cabinet and chased her upstairs. That's when I ran to call for help. Marcus glanced back at the house. No movement in any of the windows, no sounds carrying across the rain-soaked yard. The silence was almost worse than shouting would have been. Sheriff Donovan appeared beside the ambulance. Marcus, we need to move. Can't wait for crisis negotiation. That girl's been in there with an armed, intoxicated father for over 30 minutes. As if summoned by their conversation, a voice suddenly echoed from inside the house. Thomas Brennan's words carried through the partially open front door, slurred but unmistakably angry. Emma, you get down here right now. We're going to settle this once and for all. The response was immediate, a young girl's voice, high and frightened, calling from somewhere upstairs. Daddy, please. I'm sorry, please don't hurt me. Marcus felt his training kick in, but underneath the professional response was something deeper. His own daughter, Melissa, was 16. The thought of her trapped and terrified in her own home made his hands clench into fists. Sheriff Donovan was already moving toward the house. We're going in. Marcus, you take the back entrance. I'll approach from the front. If we can create enough distraction, maybe the girl can get to a window. But as they positioned themselves around the house's perimeter, Thomas Brennan's voice rang out again, this time with a chilling finality. Emma, I'm coming up there, and I'm bringing my rifle. We're going to end this shame you've brought on our family. The sound of heavy footsteps on stairs carried through the walls, followed by Emma's terrified screaming. No, Daddy, please. I'm scared. Marcus didn't wait for further orders. He kicked in the back door and moved through the kitchen, his service weapon drawn. The house smelled of stale beer and something else, the metallic scent of fear that seemed to permeate the walls. Family photos lined the hallway, showing happier times. Thomas, Sarah, and Emma at a beach vacation. Emma's school pictures from elementary through high school. Christmas mornings with presents scattered around a tree. The stairs creaked under Marcus's weight as he climbed toward the sound of muffled voices. At the top of the landing, he could see down a hallway with 4 doors. 3 were closed, but the 4th, Emma's room based on the unicorn stickers on the door, was partially open. Light spilled out, and Marcus could hear Thomas's voice. No longer shouting, but speaking in low, dangerous tones. You think you can just throw your life away? Get pregnant at 17, like some trashy girl. I raised you better than this, Emma. I worked 2 jobs to give you everything, and this is how you repay me? Emma's voice was barely audible through her tears. Daddy, I didn't mean for this to happen. I love Kevin, and he loves me. We want to keep the baby, and Kevin Martinez? That boy from the wrong side of town? Oh, Emma, you really have lost your mind. Marcus positioned himself outside the door, trying to assess the situation through the narrow opening. He could see Thomas standing in the middle of the room, his hunting rifle held across his chest. Emma sat on her bed, pressed against the headboard, her school uniform wrinkled and tear-stained. She looked so young, so frightened, that Marcus felt his resolve strengthen. The room told the story of a teenage girl caught between childhood and adulthood. Stuffed animals shared space with makeup and jewelry. Posters of boy bands hung next to academic achievement certificates. A photo of Emma and a young Latino boy, presumably Kevin, sat on her nightstand, both of them smiling at some school dance. Thomas continued his monologue, his words becoming more erratic. Your grandfather built this family's reputation with his bare hands. Came to this country with nothing and made something of himself. Your mother and I, We've worked our whole lives to give you opportunities. And you throw it all away for some boy who'll probably abandon you the minute things get tough. Kevin won't abandon me, Emma said with more strength than Marcus expected. He wants to marry me. We have plans. Plans? Thomas laughed bitterly. You're 17 years old. You don't get to make plans that destroy this family's future. Marcus knew he had to act. The conversation was escalating, and Thomas's grip on the rifle was tightening. But as he prepared to announce his presence, Thomas said something that stopped him cold. Maybe it would be better if we both just disappeared. Save your mother the embarrassment of having a pregnant teenager for a daughter and a failure for a husband. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt ice water run through his veins. This wasn't just about anger anymore. Thomas was talking about a murder-suicide. Daddy, no. Emma's voice broke with terror. Please, I'll do whatever you want. I'll give the baby up for adoption. I'll transfer schools. Just please don't hurt me. Marcus stepped into the doorway, his weapon raised but not aimed directly at Thomas. Mr. Brennan, I'm Deputy Kellerman with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. I need you to lower your weapon. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas spun around, his rifle now pointing toward Marcus. His eyes were bloodshot, his face flushed with alcohol and emotion. Stay back. This is between me and my daughter. Sir, I understand you're upset, but pointing that rifle at me isn't going to solve anything. Let's talk about this. Talk? Thomas's voice cracked. What's there to talk about? My daughter's pregnant, I lost my job, and my wife looks at me like I'm some kind of monster. Everything I've worked for is gone. Marcus could see Emma behind her father, still pressed against the headboard. Her eyes met his, pleading silently for help. She was holding her stomach protectively, a gesture so instinctive and maternal that it struck Marcus as profoundly moving despite the circumstances. Mr. Brennan, your daughter needs you right now. She's scared and confused, and she needs her father to help her figure this out. Threatening her with a rifle isn't going to change the situation. Help her figure it out? Thomas's laugh was hollow. She's ruined everything. 17 years old and pregnant by some boy she barely knows. Do you have any idea what that does to a family? Marcus thought of his own daughter Melissa, of the conversations they'd had about boys and future plans and making smart choices. I have a 16-year-old daughter, Mr. Brennan. I know how scary it can be, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. For a moment, Thomas's grip on the rifle loosened slightly. Then you understand. You know what it's like to want to protect them from making mistakes that will ruin their lives. I do understand that. But what I also know is that threatening your daughter isn't protection. It's exactly the opposite. Emma needs to know that no matter what happens, her father loves her and will help her through this. Thomas looked back at Emma, and for just a second, Marcus saw the man he probably was before unemployment and alcohol and desperation had twisted him into someone capable of terrorizing his own child. She was supposed to go to college, Thomas said quietly. Full scholarship to Portland State. She was going to study veterinary medicine. She's always loved animals, ever since she was little. Had this whole 5-year plan written out on her bedroom wall. Emma spoke up from the bed, her voice stronger now. Daddy, I can still go to college. Having a baby doesn't mean my life is over. Lots of people don't make it work, Emma. Thomas's anger flared again. Do you think it's easy raising a child? Do you think Kevin's part-time job at the grocery store is going to pay for diapers and formula and doctor visits? The conversation was revealing layers of Thomas's fears. That went beyond simple anger about his daughter's pregnancy. This was a man who felt like he'd failed as a provider, who'd watched his own dreams crumble, and who now saw his daughter making choices that he believed would lead to the same disappointments. Marcus, kept his weapon ready but tried to maintain a non-threatening posture. "Mr. Brennan, what if there was a way to work this out? What if Emma could still pursue her dreams, even with a baby on the way?" "How?" The question came out as a desperate plea. How does a 17-year-old girl with no job and no college degree raise a baby? The same way millions of other people have done it, with family support, with planning, with help from people who care about her. Thomas shook his head. "I can't even support myself right now. Lost my job at Hartwell, can't find work anywhere else. The bank's threatening to foreclose on the house. How am I supposed to help Emma when I can't even help myself?" The full picture was becoming clearer. Thomas Brennan wasn't just an angry father. He was a desperate man who felt like he was drowning, and his daughter's pregnancy had become the final weight that threatened to pull him completely under. Marcus made a calculated decision. He slowly lowered his weapon, though he kept it ready. "Mr. Brennan, what if I told you that there are programs designed to help families in exactly your situation? Resources for job training, assistance with housing, support for teenage mothers who want to continue their education? Programs run by the government?" Thomas's voice carried skepticism. "I've been to the unemployment office, deputy. I've filled out applications and sat through interviews. Nobody wants to hire a 44-year-old construction worker when they can get someone younger for half the pay." The rain continued to pound against Emma's bedroom window, creating a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. Marcus could hear other deputies positioning themselves throughout the house, but he also knew that this moment, right here, right now, was the critical turning point that would determine whether everyone walked out of this room alive. Emma shifted on her bed, drawing both men's attention. When she spoke, her voice carried a maturity that belied her 17 years. "Daddy, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But Kevin and we've been talking about this for weeks. We have a plan. His uncle owns a landscaping business and said he'd give Kevin full-time work. I can finish high school through the online program and still graduate on time. The baby's not due until June, so I can work part-time until then." Thomas stared at his daughter as if seeing her clearly for the first time in months. You've really thought about this?" "Every day since I found out. I know you think I'm just some silly teenager who made a mistake, but I love Kevin and I love this baby already. I want to make this work, but I need my family to help me. I need my dad to help me." The rifle in Thomas's hand seemed to grow heavier. Marcus watched as the man's shoulders sagged under the weight of emotions he'd been carrying for too long. I wanted so much more for you, Emma. I wanted you to have opportunities I never had. College, a career, a chance to see the world before settling down. I can still have those things, Daddy. Maybe not exactly the way we planned, but I can still have them. This baby doesn't have to end my dreams. Maybe it just changes them a little." Marcus sensed the shift in the room's energy. Thomas was wavering between desperation and hope, between the dark path he'd been contemplating and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward. But as the moment stretched on, Marcus also knew that the situation remained incredibly dangerous. Thomas was still armed, still intoxicated, and still operating from a place of deep emotional pain. One wrong word, one perceived threat, could still send everything spiraling toward tragedy. The next few minutes would determine whether this story ended with healing or heartbreak, with a family finding their way back to each other, or being destroyed forever by fear and desperation. The silence that followed Emma's words stretched like a taut wire. Marcus watched Thomas carefully, noting how his knuckles had gone white gripping the rifle stock. Outside, the autumn storm was intensifying, and he could hear Sheriff Donovan's voice through his radio earpiece, coordinating with the other units surrounding the house. Thomas finally broke the quiet, his voice barely above a whisper. "You really think you can handle this, Emma, being a mother at 17? Emma sat up straighter on her bed, something shifting in her posture. "I think I'm stronger than you give me credit for, Daddy. Remember when I was 12 and you got hurt on the construction site? Broke your leg in 3 places?" Marcus saw confusion flicker across Thomas's face. "What does that have to do with anything? I took care of you for 2 months. Made your meals, helped you to the bathroom, did your physical therapy exercises with you every day after school. Mom was working double shifts at the diner to keep us afloat, so it was just me and you." The memory seemed to hit Thomas like a physical blow. Marcus could see his grip on the rifle faltering as his daughter continued. "You told me then that I was the strongest person you knew, that I had more determination in my little finger than most adults had in their whole bodies. What happened to that girl, Daddy? What happened to you believing in me?" Thomas lowered the rifle slightly, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. But he also knew that cornered animals were most dangerous when they sensed escape might be possible. He needed to keep Thomas talking, keep him focused on connection rather than desperation. "Mr. Brennan," Marcus said carefully, "it sounds like Emma learned her strength from watching you overcome challenges. That's not something that disappears just because circumstances change." "You don't understand," Thomas said, but his voice lacked the earlier venom. "I've been unemployed for 3 months. Do you know what that does to a man? Watching your savings disappear, seeing your wife work herself to death trying to make ends meet, knowing that everything you've built is slipping away." Marcus thought about his own family struggles during the recession 5 years earlier, when the county had implemented hiring freezes and he'd been forced to take a second job at the hardware store. "Actually, I do know something about that feeling. But I also know that your worth as a father isn't measured by your paycheck." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say. You've got a steady job, benefits, probably a nice house in a good neighborhood. I'm about to lose everything. And now my daughter wants to throw her life away on some boy who bags groceries for minimum wage." Emma's voice cut through her father's self-pity with surprising sharpness. "Kevin doesn't just bag groceries, Daddy. He's the assistant manager, and he's been accepted to the community college business program. He starts in January." Marcus watched Thomas process this information, seeing how each detail chipped away at the narrative he'd constructed about his daughter's boyfriend. "And before you say anything about his family," Emma continued, "his parents have been married for 22 years. His dad owns his own auto repair shop, and his mom teaches elementary school. They're good people, Daddy. They want to help us succeed." The rifle was now pointing toward the floor, though Thomas still held it with both hands. Marcus could see tears starting to form in the man's eyes as the reality of what he was doing began to penetrate the alcohol and anger. "I just wanted better for you," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "College, a career, someone who could give you the world." "Maybe your definition of better isn't the same as mine," Emma replied gently. "Maybe my version of having the world includes having a family young, building something from the ground up with someone I love. Maybe I want to struggle a little bit, work for what I have instead of having it handed to me." Marcus sensed this was a crucial moment. Thomas was beginning to see his daughter not as a child making a mistake, but as a young woman with her own vision for her life. But the rifle was still in his hands, and desperation could resurface without warning. "Mr. Brennan," Marcus said, "what if Emma's right? What if this isn't the end of her opportunities, but just a different path to reach them?" Thomas looked between Marcus and his daughter, confusion and pain warring in his expression. "But she's so young. She doesn't understand how hard life can be, how quickly things can fall apart." "I understand more than you think," Emma said firmly. "I've watched you and Mom struggle. I've seen how hard you work, how much you sacrifice for our family. Do you think I would make this decision lightly? Do you think I haven't considered all the challenges?" The question hung in the air as Thomas seemed to wrestle with competing images of his daughter, the child he wanted to protect and the young woman she was becoming. Marcus's radio crackled softly in his earpiece. Sheriff Donovan's voice was barely audible. Marcus, we're in position. Crisis negotiator is on scene. How's it looking in there? Marcus pressed his finger briefly to his earpiece to acknowledge, but kept his focus on Thomas. The last thing he wanted was outside intervention to shatter this fragile progress. Mr. Brennan, I want to ask you something, Marcus said. When you were 17, did your parents support your decisions, or did they try to control your path? Thomas's face darkened. My old man threw me out when I was 16. Sighed I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything. I had to make my own way, prove him wrong every single day. And look what you accomplished. You built a career, provided for your family, raised a daughter who's clearly intelligent and thoughtful. You did all that without your father's support. That's exactly why I don't want Emma making the same mistakes I did. Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle again. I don't want her to struggle the way I struggled. Emma slid off her bed, moving slowly toward her father. Marcus tensed, ready to intervene if Thomas raised the weapon, but the girl's movements were careful and deliberate. Daddy, what if your struggles weren't mistakes? What if they were what made you strong enough to be the father who could raise a daughter like me? She stopped just out of arm's reach, close enough that Thomas could see the earnestness in her eyes, but far enough away that Marcus could still act if necessary. I'm not asking you to be happy about this situation, Emma continued. I'm asking you to trust that you raised me well enough to handle it. I'm asking you to believe in me the way you believed in yourself when your father gave up on you. Marcus watched Thomas's face cycle through a dozen emotions. The man was at a crossroads, forced to choose between his fear for his daughter's future and his faith in her character. What about college? Thomas asked quietly. What about your veterinary dreams? There's a pre-veterinary program at the community college. I can take classes part-time while Kevin works. Then when the baby's older, we can switch. He'll stay home while I finish my degree. It might take longer than we originally planned, but we'll both get where we want to go. Thomas seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him as he realized his daughter had thought through the practical details he assumed she'd ignored. You've really planned this out, he said, and it wasn't a question. Kevin and I have been talking about our future since we started dating 8 months ago. We both want careers, we both want to travel, we both want to make something of ourselves. Having a baby now means adjusting the timeline, not abandoning the dreams. Marcus could see the exact moment when Thomas began to truly hear his daughter. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing became more regular, and most importantly, his grip on the rifle loosened. I've been so scared, Thomas admitted. Scared of losing the house, scared of not being able to provide for you and your mother, scared that everything I've worked for was falling apart. When you told us about the pregnancy, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. Emma took another step closer to her father. Daddy, you haven't failed. You've had a setback. There's a difference. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. Then we'll figure it out together. Kevin's family has offered to let us stay with them if we need to. His uncle's landscaping business is expanding. He said he could use an experienced construction worker to help with hardscaping projects. Marcus saw Thomas's eyebrows raise slightly. This was clearly new information. You talked to them about me? I talked to them about all of us, Emma said. Because we're a family, and families help each other. Kevin's parents want to meet you and Mom properly. They want to discuss how we can all support each other through this. For the first time. Since Marcus had entered the room, Thomas seemed to consider possibilities beyond disaster. They really said that? Mrs. Martinez made me promise to bring you and Mom over for dinner this Sunday. She wants to make her famous tamales and talk about wedding plans. Wedding plans? Thomas's voice cracked slightly. Kevin proposed last week, properly, with a ring and everything. He asked me to marry him not because I'm pregnant, but because he loves me and wants to build a life together. The baby just means we're starting that life a little sooner than we thought." Marcus watched Thomas absorb this information, seeing how each detail painted a different picture than the one he'd constructed in his mind. Instead of a teenage pregnancy scandal, this was beginning to sound like a young couple making mature decisions about their future. "He has a ring?" Thomas asked, and Marcus could hear something that might have been paternal curiosity creeping into his voice. Emma smiled for the first time since Marcus had entered the room. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. It was his grandmother's. She gave it to him before she died last year, made him promise to only give it to someone he truly loved. He's been carrying it around for months, waiting for the right moment. Thomas stared at the ring, and Marcus could see him reconsidering everything he thought he knew about his daughter's boyfriend. "The boy's been planning to propose for months? Since my birthday is in March. He wanted to wait until after graduation, but when we found out about the baby, he said he couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to make sure I knew that his commitment to me wasn't about obligation, it was about love." The rifle was now hanging loosely in Thomas's hands, pointing at the floor. Marcus could sense the crisis was passing, but he also knew that emotional situations could shift quickly. He needed to keep the momentum moving in the right direction. "Mr. Brennan," Marcus said gently, "it sounds like your daughter and Kevin have put a lot of thought into this. They're not just reacting to an unexpected pregnancy. They're making deliberate choices about their future together." Thomas nodded slowly, then looked directly at his daughter for the first time since she'd started talking. "Emma, I owe you an apology. I've been so focused on my own failures that I couldn't see your strengths. I was trying to protect you from making what I thought were mistakes, but really I was just projecting my own fears onto your situation." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "Daddy, you haven't failed. You're here, aren't you? You're talking to me instead of doing something we'd all regret forever." The weight of what Thomas had been contemplating seemed to hit him fully for the first time. He looked down at the rifle in his hands as if seeing it clearly, then carefully set it down on Emma's desk. "God, what was I thinking? I could have hurt you. I could have hurt my baby girl." Emma closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around her father in a hug that spoke of forgiveness and love and hope for the future. Marcus felt his own eyes moisten as he watched the reunion, but his training kept him alert. He slowly moved toward the rifle, securing it while father and daughter held each other. "Mr. Brennan," Marcus said softly, "I need to take possession of this weapon, and we'll need to go downstairs so the EMTs can check both of you over. There are also some people who want to make sure Emma's okay." Thomas nodded, not releasing his hold on his daughter. "Of course, whatever you need to do." As they prepared to leave Emma's room, Marcus's radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice, crisis negotiator Janet Pierce, who had just arrived on scene. "Deputy Kellerman, what's your status?" "We're prepared to initiate contact with the subject." Marcus smiled as he keyed his radio. "Crisis resolved. All parties are safe and cooperative. We'll be coming downstairs momentarily." The relief in Sheriff Donovan's voice was audible through the static. "Outstanding work, Marcus. We'll have EMTs standing by." As they made their way toward the bedroom door, Emma stopped and looked back at the room that had nearly become the site of an unthinkable tragedy. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I want you to walk me down the aisle when Kevin and I get married. I want you to be there when your grandchild is born. I want you to be part of our future, not afraid of it." Thomas squeezed his daughter's hand. "I'd be honored, sweetheart. And I promise, I'm going to be the grandfather this baby deserves, and the father you've always needed." As they walked down the hallway together, Marcus reflected on how quickly a situation could transform from desperation to hope. In less than an hour, A potential tragedy had become a story of family reconciliation and new beginnings. But he also knew that the real work was just beginning. Thomas would need counseling, job assistance, and ongoing support to address the underlying issues that had brought him to this breaking point. Emma would need her family's help navigating teenage pregnancy and early marriage. And Kevin would need to prove himself worthy of the trust both Emma and her parents were placing in him. The storm outside was beginning to clear as they reached the top of the stairs, and Marcus could see sunlight starting to break through the clouds. It seemed like an appropriate metaphor for what had just transpired in Emma's bedroom. Sometimes the darkest storms passed quickly, leaving clearer skies and new possibilities in their wake. The descent down the stairs felt like a journey through time. With each step, Thomas seemed to shed layers of the desperate man he'd been just minutes earlier. Marcus stayed close behind, the secured rifle slung across his shoulder, while Emma walked beside her father with her hand in his dot as they reached the bottom of the staircase. Marcus could see Sheriff Donovan through the front window, speaking into her radio with visible relief. The other deputies were already beginning to stand down from their tactical positions, though they remained alert until the all-clear was officially given. The living room told its own story of the afternoons. Chaos. An overturned coffee table, shattered picture frames, and scattered magazines painted a picture of Thomas's earlier rage. But what struck Marcus most was a family portrait that had somehow remained upright on the mantelpiece. Thomas, Sarah, and Emma at what looked like Emma's 16th birthday party, all three of them laughing at something outside the cameras. "View, Sarah's going to want to see you're both okay," Marcus said as they approached the front door. "She's been worried sick." Thomas stopped abruptly, his face clouding with shame. God, what she must think of me. Her own husband, threatening our daughter with a gun. How do I even begin to apologize for that? Emma squeezed her father's hand. "The same way I apologize to you for keeping the pregnancy secret for 3 weeks. You start with 'I'm sorry,' and then you prove it with your actions." The wisdom in his daughter's words seemed to strike Thomas anew. "When did you become so smart?" "I learned from watching the best parents a girl could ask for navigate their own mistakes," Emma replied. "You and Mom aren't perfect, but you've always owned up to your errors and tried to do better." Marcus opened the front door, and immediately the scene outside shifted into motion. Sheriff Donovan approached first, her expression professional but warm. Behind her, crisis negotiator Janet Pierce looked both relieved and slightly frustrated that her services hadn't been needed. "Mr. Brennan," Sheriff Donovan said formally, "I need to inform you that you're not under arrest at this time, but we will need to discuss the events of this afternoon. First, though, let's get you and Emma checked out by the paramedics." Thomas nodded, his eyes already searching the crowd of law enforcement personnel for his wife. He found her standing beside the ambulance, Linda Walsh still at her side. Even from a distance, Marcus could see Sarah's face transform when she spotted her family emerging from the house together. The reunion was immediate and emotional. Sarah broke away from the paramedic and ran toward them, her arms enveloping both Thomas and Emma in a fierce embrace that spoke of love and relief and forgiveness all wrapped together. "I thought I'd lost you both," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with tears. "When I heard those gunshots, I thought ... "I'm so sorry," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I could have hurt Emma. I could have destroyed everything." "But you didn't," Sarah replied firmly. "You came back to us. That's what matters now." Emma pulled back from the embrace to look at both her parents. "We need to talk, all of us. About the baby, about our future, about how we're going to make this work as a family." Paramedic Linda Walsh approached with her medical bag. "Before any family meetings, I need to check you both over. Emma, honey, given your condition, I want to make sure you and the baby are okay after all this stress." As Linda began her examinations, Marcus found himself in conversation with Janet Pierce. the crisis negotiator who'd arrived just as the situation was resolving. "I've got to say, Deputy, that was some impressive work in there," Janet said, adjusting her equipment bag. "Most domestic situations like this don't end with handshakes and family hugs." Marcus reflected on the past hour, trying to understand. What had made the difference? "I think it helped that underneath all the anger and fear, Thomas Brennan is fundamentally a good man who loves his daughter. He just got overwhelmed by circumstances and made some terrible choices. The alcohol certainly didn't help his decision-making," Sheriff Donovan added, joining their conversation. "But you're right, this could have gone very differently if he'd been dealing with genuine malice rather than desperation." As they talked, Marcus became aware of activity at the edge of the police perimeter. A young Latino man had arrived and was speaking urgently with Deputy Rodriguez, who was manning the barricade. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the anxiety etched on the young man's face. "That must be Kevin," Emma's voice carried from the ambulance where Linda was taking her blood pressure. "Someone needs to let him through. He's probably terrified." Sarah looked toward the barricade, then back at Thomas. "Tom, that boy has been calling me every 10 minutes since he heard about what was happening. He wanted to come here hours ago, but I told him to stay away until it was safe." Thomas followed his wife's gaze, studying the young man who was gesturing emphatically at Deputy Rodriguez. "That's him? That's Kevin Martinez? That's your future son-in-law," Emma said pointedly. "And he's probably worried sick about me and the baby." Marcus watched Thomas's face as he processed this information. The man who had been ready to condemn Kevin sight unseen was now seeing tangible evidence of the young man's concern for Emma's well-being. "Sheriff," Thomas said to Donovan, "would it be possible for that young man to come over here? I think it's time I met him properly." Sheriff Donovan nodded and signaled to Deputy Rodriguez, who escorted Kevin through the police line. As the young man approached, Marcus could see he was about 18, with an athletic build and intelligent eyes that were currently filled with worry. "Emma!" Kevin rushed to the ambulance, but stopped short when he saw Thomas standing nearby. The tension was immediate and palpable. Emma reached out and took Kevin's hand. "It's okay. We're all okay. Dad and I worked things out." Kevin looked between Emma and her father, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Mr. Brennan, I heard what happened. I'm just glad everyone's safe." Thomas studied the young man for a long moment, and Marcus could see him comparing the real Kevin to the image he'd constructed in his mind. Where he'd expected to see irresponsibility, he found genuine concern. Where he'd anticipated immaturity, he saw a young man choosing his words carefully in a difficult situation. "Kevin," Thomas said finally, "I owe you an apology. I said some pretty harsh things about you today without knowing anything about who you really are. Sir, you were upset about Emma. I understand why you'd be protective of her." The response seemed to surprise Thomas. "You're not angry? I threatened your girlfriend and your unborn child." Kevin's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained respectful. "I won't pretend I'm not upset about what happened. But Emma told me about your job situation and the stress your family's been under. People don't always make their best decisions when they're backed into a corner." Marcus was impressed by the young man's maturity. At 18, Kevin was showing more emotional intelligence than many adults twice his age. "Emma tells me you have plans," Thomas continued, "for the future, for taking care of my daughter and grandchild." "Yes, sir, we do," Kevin straightened his shoulders. "I know we're young, and I know this isn't how most people would choose to start a family. But I love Emma, and I'm committed to making this work." Thomas gestured toward a bench near the ambulance. "Why don't you tell me about these plans?" As Kevin began outlining their future, the job with his uncle, the community college courses, the timeline for Emma's education, Marcus found himself thinking about his own daughter, Melissa. Would he be able to handle a similar conversation with the same grace Thomas was now showing? Paramedic Linda Walsh finished her examination of Emma and moved on to Thomas, checking his blood pressure and alcohol level. "Emma and the baby are fine," she announced. "No signs of distress. As for you, Mr. Brennan, you're going to have a significant headache tomorrow, but physically you're stable." Sheriff Donovan approached the group with a clipboard and a serious expression. "Mr. Brennan, we need to discuss the legal implications of today's events. While I'm glad everything ended peacefully, the fact remains that you threatened your daughter with a deadly weapon while under the influence of alcohol." The weight of his actions seemed to hit Thomas anew. "What does that mean? Am I going to jail?" "That depends on several factors," Sheriff Donovan replied carefully. "Emma's statement will be crucial, as will your willingness to seek help for the underlying issues that led to the situation." Emma immediately spoke up. "Sheriff, I don't want to press charges against my father. He wasn't thinking clearly, and he's already agreed to get help." "Emma," Sheriff Donovan said gently, "I appreciate your desire to protect your father, but the state takes domestic violence very seriously, even when the victim doesn't want to prosecute." Thomas looked stricken. "Will this affect my ability to find work? Will potential employers see this on my record?" Marcus could see the man's fears resurging, worries about unemployment, about being able to provide for his family, about the consequences of his actions rippling outward into every aspect of his life. Kevin surprised everyone by speaking up. "Sheriff, if it would help, my uncle's landscaping company doesn't do background checks for family referrals. If Mr. Brennan is serious about getting back on his feet, there's definitely work available." The offer hung in the air, a gesture of goodwill that seemed to catch Thomas completely off guard. "You would do that?" Thomas asked. "After what I did today?" "Emma's family is going to be my family," Kevin replied simply. "That includes you, sir. Besides, my uncle always says that a man should be judged by how he handles his mistakes, not by the fact that he made them." Sheriff Donovan looked thoughtful. "Mr. Brennan, if you're willing to enter a court-supervised counseling program and complete community service, it's possible we can arrange a deferred prosecution agreement. That would keep this off your permanent record if you successfully complete all requirements." "What kind of counseling?" Sarah asked, moving closer to her husband. "Anger management, alcohol counseling, and family therapy would be the standard requirements," Sheriff Donovan explained. "The goal is to address the root causes that led to today's crisis, not just punish you for it." Thomas looked around at the faces surrounding him, his wife, his daughter, his future son-in-law, and the law enforcement officers who could have treated him much more harshly than they had. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly. "Counseling, community service, whatever you require. I never want to put my family through anything like this again." Crisis negotiator Janet Pierce, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, I run a support group for men dealing with unemployment and family stress. We meet every Thursday evening at the community center. It's not therapy exactly, but it's a place where guys in similar situations can talk about their challenges without judgment." "I'd like that," Thomas said immediately. "I've been feeling pretty isolated lately. It might help to know I'm not the only one struggling." Emma had been listening to this exchange with growing emotion. "I'm proud of you, Daddy. This is exactly the kind of father I want my child to know. Someone who makes mistakes, but takes responsibility for them and works to do better." The afternoon sun was beginning to break through the storm clouds more definitively now, casting long shadows across the Willowbrook neighborhood. Marcus could see curious neighbors beginning to emerge from their houses as the police presence started to wind down. Sheriff Donovan made some final notes on her clipboard. "Mr. Brennan, you'll need to come to the station tomorrow morning to complete the paperwork for the deferred prosecution agreement. Bring your wife. We'll want her input on the family counseling component." "What about the rifle?" Thomas asked. "It belonged to my father. It's the only thing I have left of him." The weapon will be held as evidence during your counseling. Period, Sheriff Donovan explained. If you successfully complete the program, and if you obtain proper licensing and storage equipment, it can be returned to you. Thomas nodded, accepting the conditions without argument. Marcus could see how different the man looked now compared to the desperate, angry person he'd encountered in Emma's bedroom. The change was remarkable, but Marcus also knew that the real test would come in the weeks and months ahead. Kevin, Thomas said, turning to his future son-in-law, would you and your family be willing to postpone that dinner invitation until next weekend? I think I need a few days to process everything that's happened here. Of course, sir. My parents completely understand. They just want to meet you when you're ready. Emma smiled at this exchange. Actually, I was thinking we could all go to church together this Sunday. Father Martinez has been wanting to discuss wedding preparations anyway. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Father Martinez? You've already spoken to a priest? Kevin and I wanted to make sure we could have a church wedding, Emma explained. Father Martinez said he'd be happy to perform the ceremony, but he wants to meet with both families first to discuss the importance of marriage and family support. Thomas looked overwhelmed by how much planning his daughter and Kevin had already done. You two have really thought of everything, haven't you? We've had a lot of time to plan while we worked up the courage to tell you about the pregnancy. Kevin admitted. We knew it would be a shock, so we wanted to show you that we were taking this seriously. Marcus found himself thinking about the irony of the situation. Thomas had been so focused on what he perceived as his daughter's impulsiveness that he'd missed all the evidence of her careful planning and mature decision-making. As the official proceedings wound down and the various law enforcement personnel began packing up their equipment, Marcus realized that his role in this family story was nearly complete. In a few minutes, he'd file his report and move on to the next call. But the Brennans would continue working through the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Deputy Kellerman, Emma called out as Marcus prepared to leave. Thank you for listening to my dad, for giving him a chance to remember who he really is instead of just seeing someone with a gun. Marcus smiled at the young woman who had shown such remarkable courage and wisdom throughout the crisis. You did most of the work, Emma. You never stopped believing in your father, even when he stopped believing in himself. As Marcus walked back toward his patrol car, he could hear the Brennan family making plans, discussing counseling appointments, job interviews, wedding preparations, and baby preparations. The crisis that had brought him here was over, but their real journey was just beginning. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind clear skies and the fresh scent of rain-washed air. It seemed like a perfect metaphor for what had transpired that afternoon. Sometimes the darkest moments were followed by the clearest light, and sometimes the people who seemed most lost were actually just one conversation away from finding their way home. 3 weeks had passed since the standoff on Maple Street, and Deputy Marcus Kellerman found himself driving through the Willowbrook neighborhood on his regular patrol route. The autumn leaves had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, creating a picturesque backdrop that made it hard to believe such a dramatic scene had unfolded here just weeks earlier. As he approached the Brennan house, Marcus noticed changes that spoke to the family's ongoing transformation. The front yard, which had been scattered with broken garden ornaments on that rainy afternoon, now showed signs of careful attention. New flowers had been planted along the walkway, and a fresh coat of paint brightened the front door. Most significantly, a for sale sign stood in the yard, but it bore a bright red sold banner across the top. Marcus's radio crackled with a routine traffic stop assignment, but before he could respond, he saw a familiar figure emerge from the Brennan house. Thomas Brennan, looking healthier than Marcus had seen him in weeks, was carrying boxes to a pickup truck parked in the driveway. Behind him, Kevin Martinez appeared with more boxes, the two men working together with an easy cooperation that would have been unimaginable during their first meeting, curiosity getting the better of him. Marcus pulled his patrol car to the curb and stepped out. The sound of his car door closing caught Thomas's attention, and the man's face broke into a genuine smile. "Deputy Kellerman, good to see you." Thomas set down his box and walked over, extending his hand in greeting. "I was hoping I'd get a chance to thank you again before we moved." "You're moving?" Marcus asked, noting how different Thomas looked. The desperate, angry man from 3 weeks ago had been replaced by someone who appeared rested, focused, and purposeful. "Kevin's uncle found us a small house about 2 miles from here," Thomas explained. "It's nothing fancy, but it's within our budget, and the landlord is willing to work with us on the security deposit." Kevin joined them, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Deputy Kellerman, good to see you again. Mr. Brennan's been a huge help with the moving. I don't know how Emma and I would have managed all this furniture without him." Marcus could see the easy rapport that had developed between the two men, but what struck him most was how Kevin naturally referred to Thomas as Mr. Brennan with genuine respect, while Thomas's body language showed he'd come to regard Kevin as more than just that boy who'd gotten his daughter pregnant. "How are the counseling sessions going?" Marcus asked Thomas directly. Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. "Better than I expected. Honestly, Dr. Patricia Wilson, she's the therapist the court assigned. She's helping me understand that a lot of my anger wasn't really about Emma's pregnancy. It was about feeling like I'd lost control of everything in my life. The unemployment was hitting him harder than any of us realized," Kevin added. "Dr. Wilson says it's really common for men to feel like their identity is tied up in being providers. So when that gets threatened, it can trigger all kinds of destructive behavior." Marcus was impressed by Kevin's insight. "That's pretty sophisticated thinking for someone your age." Kevin grinned. "Emma and I have been sitting in on some of the family counseling sessions. Dr. Wilson says it's important for us to understand the dynamics that led to the crisis, so we can help prevent anything like it from happening again." "Speaking of Emma," Thomas said, "she's inside with Sarah, packing up her room. She'd love to see you, if you have a few minutes." Marcus checked his watch. His shift was nearly over, and the traffic stop could wait another few minutes. "I'd like that." As they walked toward the house, Thomas continued talking about the changes in his life. "Janet Pierce's support group has been incredible. There are 8 guys who meet every Thursday, all dealing with job loss, family stress, financial pressure. Just knowing I'm not alone in this struggle has made a huge difference." "Any luck with job prospects?" Marcus asked. "Actually, yes." Thomas's voice carried a note of pride. "Kevin's uncle, Roberto Martinez, offered me a position with his landscaping company. It's physical work, which I'm used to, but it's also teaching me about business management. Roberto's been talking about expanding into residential construction, consulting, and he thinks my background could be valuable for that." Kevin opened the front door for them. "My uncle says Mr. Brennan, has some of the best instincts for reading construction sites he's ever seen. He's already helped land 2 major contracts just by spotting potential problems other landscapers missed." The casual way Kevin had started to say, "Dad," before correcting himself didn't go unnoticed by Marcus, nor did the pleased expression that crossed Thomas's face at the slip. Inside the house, the evidence of impending departure was everywhere. Boxes lined the hallways, and rooms that had once been fully furnished now showed the bare bones of domestic life. But what struck Marcus most was the atmosphere. Instead of the tension and desperation that had pervaded the house 3 weeks ago, there was a sense of purposeful activity and even excitement. Emma's voice carried from upstairs. "Kevin, did you find my high school yearbooks? I want to make sure they don't get lost in the move." "They're in the box marked Emma's school stuff," Kevin called back. "Right next to your college prep materials." Sarah Brennan appeared from the kitchen, her arms full of wrapped dishes. She looked tired but content, and her face lit up when she saw Marcus. "Deputy Kellerman, What a wonderful surprise. Emma will be so excited to see you. How are you holding up with all this, Mrs. Brennan? Marcus asked. Sarah set down her load and brushed a strand of hair from her face. It's been the strangest 3 weeks of my life, honestly. In some ways, it feels like we're starting over completely. New house, new jobs, new understanding of each other as a family. New jobs? You found work too? The community college where Kevin's enrolled offered me a position in their continuing education department, Sarah explained. It's perfect timing, because I'll be able to help coordinate programs for other adults who are going back to school or changing careers. And the benefits include tuition assistance, so I can finally finish my own degree. Thomas appeared beside his wife, carrying a box labeled Kitchen Essentials. Sarah's always wanted to get her teaching certificate. Now she'll be able to take education courses while helping other people navigate similar transitions. The transformation in this family was remarkable. 3 weeks ago, they had been on the verge of complete breakdown. Now they were talking about new careers, educational opportunities, and fresh starts with an energy that spoke to genuine hope rather than desperate optimism. Emma's footsteps on the stairs announced her arrival before she came into view. When she appeared, Marcus was struck by how different she looked. The terrified 17-year-old he'd encountered in her bedroom had been replaced by a young woman who moved with confidence and purpose. Her pregnancy was now clearly visible, and she wore it with a kind of quiet pride. Deputy Kellerman. Emma's face broke into a huge smile. I'm so glad you stopped by. I've been wanting to show you something. She disappeared momentarily into the kitchen and returned with an official-looking document. My acceptance letter to Portland Community College's online high school completion program. I'll graduate on schedule in June, just a month before the due baby's due. Marcus examined the letter, noting the academic requirements and the timeline Emma had laid out for herself. This is impressive, Emma. How are you managing the coursework with everything else going on? It's actually easier than regular high school in some ways, Emma replied. I can work at my own pace, and Kevin helps me with the subjects that are challenging for me. Plus, Dr. Wilson says that having concrete goals and achievements helps counteract the anxiety I was feeling about the future. Kevin joined the conversation. Emma's helping me with my business courses too. She's got this amazing head for numbers, an organization that I completely lack. We make a good team, Emma said, reaching for Kevin's hand. Which reminds me, we have news to share. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances, and Marcus could see both excitement and apprehension in their expressions. We've set a wedding date, Kevin announced. December 15th, at St. Anthony's Cathedral. Father Martinez agreed to perform the ceremony, and both families will be there. Sarah clapped her hands together. December 15th. Emma, that's only 6 weeks away. Are you sure you'll have enough time to plan everything? Mrs. Martinez and I have been working on the details for 2 weeks, Emma replied. It's going to be a small ceremony, maybe 40 people total. We want to focus on the commitment we're making to each other, not on throwing a big party we can't afford. Thomas looked thoughtful. What about your dress? Your mother and I want to contribute something meaningful to this wedding. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Actually, Daddy, Mrs. Martinez showed me her wedding dress from 1985. It's this beautiful lace design that she's been saving for Kevin's wedding. She asked if I'd like to wear it, maybe with some modifications to accommodate ... Emma gestured toward her growing belly. That's a wonderful tradition, Sarah said softly. Something borrowed from your new family. Marcus found himself moved by the integration of traditions and families that was taking place. What had started as a crisis rooted in fear of change had evolved into an embrace of new possibilities and expanded relationships. How are the Martinez family taking all of this? Marcus asked. Kevin's expression grew warm. My parents are incredible. They've basically adopted Emma as their daughter already. My mom's been teaching her to make traditional Mexican dishes. And my dad's been helping her understand the landscaping business, so she can help with the books when I take over more responsibilities. And Mr. Brennan, Kevin continued, turning toward Thomas, my parents keep asking when you and Mrs. Brennan are coming over for that dinner we talked about. My mom's been planning the menu for 2 weeks. Thomas laughed, a sound that Marcus hadn't heard from him during their previous encounters. Tell your mother we'll be there this Sunday after church. And ask her if there's anything Sarah and I can bring to contribute to the meal. She'd be so excited, Kevin said. She's been worried that she's overstepping boundaries by being so involved in the wedding planning. Kevin, Emma said seriously, your mother isn't overstepping anything. She's showing me what it means to be welcomed into a family with open arms. I hope our baby grows up knowing that kind of unconditional love from both sets of grandparents. The word grandparents seemed to hit Thomas with particular impact. Marcus watched the man's face cycle through emotions, surprise, pride, anticipation, and something that looked like wonder. I'm going to be a grandfather, Thomas said quietly, as if the reality was just now fully sinking in. In 6 months, there's going to be a little person calling me Grandpa, a little person who's going to need the wisdom and strength that both their grandfathers can provide. Emma added, this baby is going to be so lucky having Roberto Martinez and Thomas Brennan as role models. Marcus could see how this perspective, framing the pregnancy as an addition to the family rather than a burden, had fundamentally changed Thomas's relationship to the situation. Instead of seeing Emma's pregnancy as the end of her opportunities, he was beginning to see it as the beginning of new roles and relationships for everyone involved. Sarah appeared with a photo album that had been packed in one of the boxes. I've been putting together pictures for the baby's room, she explained, opening to a page that showed Emma as a newborn in Thomas's arms. I want our grandchild to see that their grandfather has always been someone who protects and loves the babies in his family. The photo showed a much younger Thomas, his face filled with the same wonder and protectiveness that Marcus could see emerging now as the man contemplated becoming a grandfather. Dr. Wilson says that one of the most healing things for families dealing with crisis is to reconnect with their core values and positive memories, Thomas said. Looking at pictures like this reminds me that being a father, and now a grandfather, has always been the most important job I've ever had. Emma moved to stand beside her father, looking down at the photo. I remember you telling me that when I was born, you promised to always be the kind of father who would fight for me, protect me, and believe in me. 3 weeks ago, you forgot that promise for a little while, but you remembered it when it mattered most. Thomas put his arm around his daughter. I hope I never forget it again. And I hope your baby never has to doubt that their grandfather will always be in their corner. Kevin cleared his throat. Actually, about that, Emma and I have been talking about names, and we'd like to ask both of you something. Marcus could see the anticipation building in Thomas and Sarah's faces. If it's a boy, Emma said, we'd like to name him Thomas Roberto Martinez Brennan, after both his grandfathers. Thomas's composure finally broke completely. Tears streamed down his face as he processed the honor his daughter and future son-in-law wanted to bestow on him. You would do that? He asked through his tears. After everything I put you through? Especially because of everything we've been through, Kevin said firmly. Emma told me about the man you were before unemployment and stress and fear changed you temporarily. She told me about the father who taught her to be strong, who believed in her dreams, who worked 2 jobs to give her opportunities. That's the grandfather we want our son to know. Sarah was crying too now, overwhelmed by the gesture and by seeing her husband's emotional healing in real time. Marcus found his own eyes growing moist as he witnessed this moment of family reconciliation and forward-looking hope. The transformation from crisis to healing was complete, but more than that, it had become a foundation for even stronger family bonds. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows of the nearly empty house, Marcus realized that his brief stop had stretched into over an hour. But he also realized that he'd been privileged to witness something remarkable, a family that had nearly been destroyed by fear and desperation, choosing instead to rebuild on a foundation of love, understanding, and mutual support. "I should probably let you get back to your packing," Marcus said finally. "But I want you all to know how proud I am of the work you've done these past 3 weeks. Not everyone gets a second chance like this, and fewer people still have the courage to take advantage of it the way you have." Emma hugged him goodbye. "Deputy Kellerman, you saved our family that day. Not just by keeping us physically safe, but by helping my father remember who he really was underneath all that pain and fear." Marcus smiled at the young woman who had shown such remarkable courage during the crisis. "Emma, you saved your family yourselves. I was just there to witness it happen." As Marcus walked back toward his patrol car, he could hear the Brennan family resuming their packing activities, their voices full of plans and possibilities. The crisis that had brought him into their lives was now just a painful memory that had been transformed into a catalyst for positive change. Driving away from Willowbrook Subdivision, Marcus reflected on the power of second chances and the resilience of families committed to healing together. Sometimes the darkest moments really did precede the brightest new beginnings, and sometimes the people who seemed most lost were actually just one conversation away from finding their way home. 6 months later, on a warm June morning that promised to be perfect for outdoor celebrations, Deputy Marcus Kellerman found himself standing in the parking lot of Cedar Falls General Hospital, adjusting his dress uniform. Today was different from his usual patrol duties. Today he was attending a very special ceremony as an honored guest of the Brennan Martinez family. The hospital's maternity ward was buzzing with activity, but Marcus navigated the familiar corridors with purpose. Room 312 had been transformed into a celebration space with balloons, flowers, and a welcome baby Thomas banner stretched across one wall. The sight that greeted him as he approached the doorway would remain etched in his memory forever. Emma sat propped up in the hospital bed, radiant despite having given birth just 18 hours earlier. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. Thomas Roberto Martinez Brennan, all 7 pounds and 3 ounces of him. Kevin stood beside the bed, his face glowing with the unmistakable pride of new fatherhood, one protective hand resting on his wife's shoulder. Yes, wife. The December wedding had been everything Emma had hoped for, intimate, meaningful, and surrounded by 2 families who had learned to love and support each other through crisis and joy alike. "Deputy Kellerman." Emma's voice carried across the room, drawing the attention of the dozen family members gathered around the bed. "Come meet your grandson." The joke had become a running theme over the past months. Emma insisted that Marcus was family now, having played such a crucial role in keeping their family together during their darkest moment. While Marcus had initially protested the honorary status, he'd gradually come to cherish his connection to this remarkable family. Thomas Brennan, Grandfather Thomas, as he now insisted on being called to distinguish himself from his tiny namesake, approached Marcus with a smile that showed how completely his life had transformed. Gone was any trace of the desperate, angry man from that October afternoon. In his place stood someone who radiated contentment and purpose. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Thomas said, clasping the deputy's hand in both of his own. "Emma wouldn't let us start the blessing ceremony until you arrived." "Blessing ceremony?" Marcus asked, though he was already moved by being included in such an intimate family moment. Sarah Brennan, now Sarah Martinez Brennan, after a beautiful ceremony renewing her vows with Thomas the previous month, appeared beside her husband. Her transformation had been as remarkable as his. The stressed, frightened woman from the crisis had been replaced by someone who radiated confidence and joy. "Father Martinez is going to perform a blessing for the baby," Sarah explained. "It's A Martinez family tradition, welcoming new children into the community of faith and family before they're formally baptized. Marcus looked around the room and realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. The Martinez family occupied one side of the space, Roberto and Maria Martinez, Kevin's parents, along with his siblings and cousins. The Brennan side included not just Thomas and Sarah, but also extended family members who had traveled from 3 states away to meet the newest addition. But what struck Marcus most was how seamlessly the two families had blended. There were no visible divides, no separate camps. Instead, he saw a unified group of people who had chosen to become family to each other, bound together not just by the marriage of their children, but by shared values and mutual respect. Dr. Patricia Wilson, the therapist who had guided the Brennan family through their healing process, stood near the window with Janet Pierce from the men's support group. Even they had become part of this extended family network, their professional relationships having evolved into genuine friendships. "Before we begin," Father Martinez announced, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him such an effective counselor for young couples, "I'd like Kevin and Emma to share what this child means to them and to both families." Kevin stepped forward, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible in his eyes. "6 months ago, when Emma first told me she was pregnant, I was scared. Not of being a father, but of whether I was mature enough, responsible enough, worthy enough of the trust she was placing in me." He looked around the room, making eye contact with family members from both sides. "What I've learned is that raising a child isn't something you do alone. It's something a community does together. Thomas Roberto isn't just our son, he's everyone's opportunity to shape the next generation." Emma adjusted the baby in her arms, her voice strong and clear. "When I was 17 and found out I was pregnant, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd disappointed everyone, destroyed my future, ruined my family's reputation. What I discovered is that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning." She looked directly at her father. "Daddy, you taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and helping other people do the same." This little boy is going to grow up knowing that his grandfather is someone who made mistakes, owned up to them, and chose to become better because of them. Thomas wiped tears from his eyes, still overwhelmed by how completely his relationship with his daughter had been transformed and deepened through their shared crisis and recovery. Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Thomas just the week before, when the expectant grandfather had called to invite him to today's ceremony. Thomas had wanted to share how his life had changed, not just the obvious improvements, but the deeper transformations that weren't visible from the outside. The job with Roberto Martinez's landscaping company had evolved into a genuine partnership. Thomas's construction expertise had helped the business expand into high-end residential projects, and his natural leadership abilities had emerged as he began training other workers who were transitioning from different careers. Roberto had even begun discussing making Thomas a part owner of the company, but beyond professional success, Thomas had discovered a calling he'd never expected. His experience with unemployment, family crisis, and recovery had made him uniquely qualified to mentor other men facing similar challenges. Janet Pierce's Thursday night support group had grown to include nearly 20 participants, with Thomas serving as a peer counselor who could speak from authentic experience about the journey from desperation to hope. "The thing that amazes me most," Thomas had told Marcus during that phone call, "is that the worst day of my life, the day I threatened my own daughter with a gun, has somehow become the foundation for the best year of my life. Not because I'm glad it happened, but because facing that darkness forced me to choose who I really wanted to be." Now, watching Thomas hold his grandson with infinite tenderness, Marcus could see the truth of that statement. The crisis had stripped away everything non-essential and revealed the core of who Thomas Brennan really was. A man who loved his family deeply and would do whatever it took to protect and provide for them. Emma's voice brought Marcus back to the present moment. We also want to acknowledge the people who helped make this miracle possible. Deputy Kellerman, if you hadn't had the patience and wisdom to see past my father's anger to the love underneath, this baby might never have been born. You saved all 3 generations of our family that day. The words hit Marcus with unexpected force. He'd thought of his role as simply doing his job, but Emma's perspective helped him understand that his choices that October afternoon had ripple effects he'd never fully considered. Roberto Martinez stepped forward, his weathered hands gentle as he reached for his grandson. In our family, we believe that children are gifts that connect the past to the future. This little boy carries the names of both his grandfathers, but more than that, he carries the hope that our family's love for each other will continue growing for generations to come. As baby Thomas was passed from person to person, each family member taking a moment to hold him and whisper private blessings, Marcus observed the intricate web of relationships that had formed around this tiny life. The baby would grow up knowing not just his parents and grandparents, but an entire community of people who had invested in his well-being before he was even born. Maria Martinez, Kevin's mother, approached Marcus with a warm smile. Over the past months, she had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Emma, teaching her traditional recipes and sharing wisdom about marriage and motherhood that bridged cultural differences. Deputy Kellerman, Kevin told me what you said to Thomas that day about your own daughter. How is Melissa doing? Marcus smiled, touched that Maria remembered details about his personal life from conversations months earlier. She's doing well, thank you for asking. Actually, she's been accepted to the pre-veterinary program at Oregon State University. Emma's been mentoring her about managing academic goals with real-world responsibilities. That's wonderful. Emma mentioned that Melissa was interested in veterinary medicine. It's beautiful how your families have stayed connected. The connection had indeed surprised Marcus. After the crisis resolution, Emma had reached out to thank him personally for his role in preventing tragedy. That conversation had led to others, and eventually to a friendship between Emma and Melissa that had benefited both young women. Emma's experience with early responsibility had helped Melissa think more seriously about her future goals, while Melissa's academic focus had encouraged Emma to maintain her own educational aspirations. Dr. Patricia Wilson joined their conversation, her professional demeanor softened by the joy of the occasion. Marcus, I hope you know how significant your intervention was that day. In my 15 years of family therapy, I've rarely seen such a complete transformation from a single crisis. Point. What made the difference? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the psychological dynamics that had allowed this family to not just survive their crisis, but emerge stronger from it. Several factors, Dr. Wilson replied thoughtfully. First, despite his actions that day, Thomas was fundamentally a good man who loved his family. The crisis was born from desperation, not malice. Second, Emma showed remarkable maturity in refusing to demonize her father, even in the midst of being threatened by him. She continued to see him as someone who was struggling rather than someone who was evil. She paused, watching Thomas gently rock his grandson while talking quietly to Sarah about their plans for the baby's nursery. But perhaps most importantly, Dr. Wilson continued, everyone involved was willing to do the hard work of change. Thomas didn't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. Emma and Kevin didn't just demand acceptance without showing responsibility. Sarah didn't just play the victim. Everyone took ownership of their part in both the problem and the solution. Marcus reflected on this analysis as he watched the family interactions around him. The baby was now in Sarah's arms, and she was introducing him to his various aunts, uncles, and cousins with the pride of a grandmother who had waited years for. This moment. Kevin appeared beside Marcus, his face showing the exhaustion and exhilaration that marked new fathers everywhere. Deputy, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did for our family. But I also wanted to tell you something Emma and I decided. Marcus raised an eyebrow, curious about what the young couple had planned. We've been talking about the future, about how to make sure Thomas Roberto grows up understanding the importance of service to others. We've decided that when he's old enough, we want to bring him to your police station to learn about the work you do. We want him to understand that heroes aren't just people in movies. They're people like you who choose to help families stay together even when situations look hopeless. The gesture touched Marcus deeply. Kevin, I appreciate that more than you know, but I hope you'll also make sure he understands that the real heroes in this story are his parents and grandparents, who chose love and hard work over fear and giving up. Emma's voice carried from across the room. Kevin, bring Deputy Kellerman over here. I want to show him something. They approached the bed where Emma sat surrounded by photo albums and scrapbooks. I've been putting together a memory book for Thomas Roberto, she explained, opening to a page that showed pictures from her wedding day. But I also wanted to document the story of how our family almost fell apart and then chose to come back together stronger than ever. She turned to a page that Marcus hadn't expected to see. There, carefully mounted and captioned, was a copy of the police report from that October day, along with photos of the house, the family, and even one of Marcus in his uniform taken during a later visit. I don't want Thomas Roberto to grow up thinking our family has always been perfect, Emma explained. I want him to know that we've faced real challenges, made real mistakes, and found real solutions. I want him to understand that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day, especially when things get difficult. The final pages of the scrapbook showed the family's journey over the past months. Thomas at his new job, Emma at her high school graduation, Kevin at community college, family dinners with the Martinez family, counseling sessions, support, group meetings, and finally, wedding photos that radiated joy and hope. This is incredible, Emma, Marcus said, moved by the thoroughness with which she'd documented their transformation. You've created a roadmap for other families who might face similar crises. Actually, Emma said with a smile, that's exactly what we're hoping to do. Dr. Wilson asked if we'd be willing to share our story with other families she's counseling. Thomas has already started speaking at Janet Pierce's support groups about his experience. Thomas overheard the conversation and joined them, still cradling his grandson. It's amazing how many men are dealing with the same feelings I had: unemployment, failure, loss of identity, fear for their families' futures. When I tell them about that day, about how close I came to destroying everything I loved, it helps them realize they're not alone in feeling desperate. And when I talk to teenage mothers about planning for the future while staying connected to family support, Emma added, they see that unexpected pregnancy doesn't have to mean abandoned dreams. Marcus realized he was witnessing something even more significant than one family's recovery. The Brennan Martinez family had transformed their personal crisis into a resource for helping others facing similar challenges. Their story was becoming a beacon of hope for other families teetering on the edge of breakdown. Father Martinez called for attention as he prepared to begin the blessing ceremony. Before we formally welcome Thomas Roberto into our community of faith, I want to remind everyone that this child represents more than just the next generation of two families. He represents the power of love to overcome fear, of forgiveness to heal wounds, and of hope to create new possibilities from the ashes of old mistakes. As the ceremony began, with prayers and blessings offered in both English and Spanish, Marcus found himself thinking about the randomness of life that had brought him into this family story. A routine emergency call had connected him to people who would change his own understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. When the formal blessing concluded, the room erupted in gentle celebration. Marcus watched as baby Thomas Roberto was passed among his extended family. each person taking a moment to hold him and whisper private hopes for his future. Emma approached Marcus one final time as the gathering began to wind down. "Deputy Kellerman, I have one more favor to ask." "Of course, Emma. What do you need?" She gestured toward the baby, now sleeping peacefully in Kevin's arms. "Would you be willing to be Thomas Roberto's godfather? Not officially through the church. That will be Kevin's brother, but as someone who commits to being part of his life, helping guide him as he grows up." The request caught Marcus completely off guard. "Emma, I'm honored that you'd even consider me for that role, but I'm not family." "Yes, you are," Emma said firmly. "You became family the moment you chose to see past my father's anger to the love underneath. You became family when you helped us find our way back to each other. Family isn't just about blood, it's about people who show up for each other when it matters most." Marcus looked around the room at the faces that had become familiar over the past months. Thomas and Sarah, whose marriage had grown stronger through crisis. Kevin and Emma, whose young love had matured into genuine partnership. Roberto and Maria Martinez, who had opened their hearts to welcome strangers as children. Dr. Wilson and Janet Pierce, whose professional care had evolved into personal friendship. "I would be honored to be part of Thomas Roberto's life," Marcus said finally. "And I promise to help him understand the incredible legacy of love and resilience he's inherited from both sides of his family." As Marcus prepared to leave the hospital that afternoon, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A routine emergency call had evolved into a story of redemption, transformation, and the power of second chances. The family that had nearly been destroyed by fear and desperation had chosen instead to rebuild on a foundation of love, understanding, and mutual support. 6 months ago, Marcus had prevented a tragedy. Today, he had witnessed the miracle that grew from that prevented tragedy, a new life surrounded by people who had learned to love each other more deeply because they had faced the possibility of losing each other completely. The baby who slept peacefully in the hospital room would grow up knowing that his family's love for each other had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. He would learn that his grandfather was someone who had made terrible mistakes and chosen to become better because of them. He would understand that his parents were people who had faced unexpected challenges with courage and maturity beyond their years. Most importantly, Thomas Roberto Martinez Brennan would grow up knowing that families aren't perfect. They're just committed to loving each other through imperfection, crisis, and change. As Marcus drove away from Cedar Falls General Hospital, his radio crackled with another emergency call. Somewhere in Riverside County, another family was facing a crisis that might destroy them or transform them, depending on the choices they made in the next few hours. Marcus smiled as he turned on his lights and sirens, heading toward whatever challenge awaited. He carried with him now a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve and protect, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important part of police work wasn't enforcing the law. It was helping people remember who they really were underneath their fear and pain. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as he drove toward his next call, carrying with him the blessing of having witnessed one family's journey from the brink of destruction to the celebration of new life. In a world that often seemed filled with tragedy and heartbreak, the Brennan Martinez family had given him the gift of hope, proof that love really could conquer fear, that forgiveness really could heal wounds, and that sometimes the darkest moments really did precede the brightest new beginnings. 2 years had passed since baby Thomas Roberto first opened his eyes at Cedar Falls General Hospital, and the transformation in everyone's lives had continued to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. Deputy Marcus Kellerman sat in his patrol car outside Roosevelt Elementary School, watching the afternoon pickup routine that had become familiar over the past months. But today was special. Today marked the second anniversary of the crisis that had brought the Brennan Martinez family together, and tonight they would gather to celebrate how far they'd all come. The radio crackled with routine dispatch calls. But Marcus's attention was drawn to a familiar figure emerging from the school's main entrance. Emma Martinez Brennan, now 19 and radiating the confidence of a young woman who had successfully navigated early motherhood while pursuing her dreams, carried a stack of papers and wore the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed something meaningful. Emma had enrolled in Roosevelt Elementary's evening GED program 18 months earlier, not because she needed the credential. She'd already completed her high school requirements online, but because she wanted to help other young parents finish their education. What had started as volunteer tutoring had evolved into a part-time teaching assistant position that perfectly complemented her morning classes at Portland Community College. Deputy Kellerman, Emma waved as she approached his patrol car. Perfect timing. I was hoping I'd see you today. Marcus rolled down his window, genuinely pleased to see Emma. Their friendship had deepened over the past 2 years, evolving from the crisis that brought them together into a mentoring relationship that benefited both of them. Emma's insights about reaching struggling families had influenced Marcus's approach to domestic calls, while his experience with conflict resolution had helped her develop skills for working with resistant students. How did the parent conference go? Marcus asked, referring to the meeting Emma had mentioned during their last conversation. Emma's face lit up. Better than I hoped. You remember I told you about Maria Santos, the 16-year-old, who was about to drop out when she found out she was pregnant? Marcus nodded. Emma had been working with several teenage mothers, helping them navigate the challenges of continuing their education while preparing for parenthood. The parallel to her own experience 2 years earlier wasn't lost on anyone. Maria decided to stay in school, Emma continued excitedly. Her boyfriend's family is going to help with childcare, and she's determined to graduate on time. But the best part is that her father, who initially reacted almost exactly like my dad did, came to the meeting today to discuss how he can support her goals. The echo of Thomas Brennan's initial reaction struck Marcus as both poignant and hopeful. How did you handle that conversation? I shared our family story, Emma replied simply. I told him about the day my father pointed a rifle at me, thinking it was the only way to protect me from what he saw as a terrible mistake. Then I showed him pictures of my graduation, my marriage, my beautiful son, and my current life. I explained that his daughter needed his support, not his condemnation. Marcus was continually amazed by Emma's ability to transform her family's most painful moment into a tool for helping others. What was his response? He cried, Emma said softly. Then he asked if he could meet my father, to talk to another man who had been where he is now. I'm bringing him to tonight's dinner. Tonight's dinner. Marcus had been looking forward to it for weeks. What had started as a simple anniversary acknowledgement had grown into a community celebration that would bring together everyone whose lives had been touched by the Brennan Martinez family's journey. The guest list now included not just family members, but also colleagues from the sheriff's department, clients from Thomas's landscaping business, students from Emma's tutoring program, and participants from the various support groups that had grown out of their initial crisis. Speaking of tonight, Emma continued, Thomas Roberto has been asking all week if Uncle Marcus is really coming to his birthday party. Marcus smiled at the confusion. The dinner celebration happened to coincide with the toddler's second birthday, creating a dual occasion that seemed perfectly appropriate given how intertwined the family's recovery had become with the child's existence. I wouldn't miss it, Marcus assured her. How's the little guy doing? Emma's expression grew soft with maternal pride. He's incredible, Marcus. Yesterday, he helped Kevin plant flowers in our garden, and he kept saying, pretty flowers for Mama. This morning, he helped Grandpa Thomas build a birdhouse by holding the hammer, safely of course. And this afternoon, Abuela Maria taught him how to count to 10 in Spanish while they made cookies together. The extended family network that had formed around Thomas Roberto continued to amaze Marcus. The child was growing up surrounded by more love and attention than many children received from just their immediate families. Roberto and Maria Martinez had fully embraced their role as additional grandparents, while Thomas and Sarah had discovered that grandparenthood suited them perfectly. How are Thomas and Sarah adjusting to the expansion? Marcus asked, referencing the news Emma had shared the previous month. Emma's smile widened. They're over the moon about Kevin's sister Carmen moving here from Phoenix. Having another young couple in the family network has been wonderful, especially since Carmen's expecting their first baby in the fall. The expansion of the Martinez-Brennan family network had been organic and natural. Carmen Martinez had struggled with her own family challenges in Arizona, and the success stories she'd heard from her brother and new sister-in-law had inspired her to relocate to Oregon with her husband Miguel. Thomas had immediately offered Miguel a position with the landscaping company, which had grown substantially over the past 2 years. And the business expansion is going well, Marcus asked. Beyond anyone's expectations, Emma replied. Dad and Roberto are opening a second location in Salem next month. They've hired 8 full-time employees, including 3 other men from Janet Pierce's support group who needed fresh starts. The success of Martinez-Brennan Landscaping had become something of a local legend. What had started as Roberto Martinez offering a job to a desperate man in crisis had evolved into a thriving business that specialized in giving second chances to workers facing various life challenges. Their reputation for quality work was matched by their commitment to social responsibility, creating a business model that other companies were beginning to emulate. Marcus's radio interrupted their conversation with a domestic disturbance call. As he prepared to respond, Emma touched his arm gently. Marcus, before you go, I wanted to tell you something important. Dr. Wilson and I have been invited to present our family story at the National Conference on Family Crisis Intervention next month in Denver. Marcus felt a surge of pride for Emma's continued growth and impact. That's incredible, Emma. What will you be presenting? A workshop called From Crisis to Community: How One Family's Near Tragedy Became a Blueprint for Healing. We're going to share the practical steps that helped us transform our worst moment into our greatest opportunity for growth. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that Emma, who had once been a terrified teenager hiding in her bedroom, was now preparing to address mental health professionals from across the country about family resilience and recovery. Dr. Wilson says our story demonstrates something called post-traumatic growth, Emma continued. The idea that some people don't just recover from trauma, they actually become stronger and more purposeful because of it. Marcus thought about his own experience over the past 2 years. His involvement with the Brennan Martinez family had changed his approach to police work, making him more attuned to the underlying causes of domestic conflicts and more skilled at de-escalation techniques. He'd been promoted to senior deputy, partly based on his success rate with family crisis calls. Emma, I'm incredibly proud of how you've taken your experience and used it to help others. Your parents must be amazed by the woman you've become. Emma's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Marcus, I need you to understand something. The woman I've become exists because you saw past my father's anger that day and helped him remember who he really was. Every family I help, every student I tutor, every young mother I encourage, they're all connected to the choice you made to believe in our family's capacity for healing. The radio crackled again with increasing urgency about the domestic call. Marcus knew he needed to respond, but Emma's words had touched something deep in his understanding of the ripple effects of individual actions. I have to take this call, Marcus said. But Emma, thank you for reminding me why this job matters. I'll see you tonight. As Marcus drove toward the domestic disturbance, he found himself thinking about the parallels between tonight's call and the one that had changed so many lives 2 years earlier. Somewhere in Riverside County, another family was facing a crisis that could destroy them or transform them, depending on the choices made in the next few hours. The address was in Maplewood Heights, a middle-class neighborhood similar to Willowbrook where the Brennan crisis had unfolded. As Marcus arrived on scene, he could see the familiar signs: patrol cars positioned strategically, neighbors gathered behind police tape, an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. Sheriff Donovan approached his vehicle as he parked. Domestic situation: Marcus, 40-year-old father, recently laid off from the paper mill. Teenage son came home with news that he's dropping out of school to join the military. Father's been drinking, threatening the boy with violence. Mother called it in. The similarities to the Brennan situation were striking, but Marcus now approached such calls with a different perspective. His experience 2 years earlier had taught him to look beyond the immediate crisis to the underlying fears and disappointments that drove desperate behavior. Any weapons involved? Marcus asked. Father has a baseball bat. Says he's going to knock some sense into his son before the boy ruins his life. Marcus nodded, his mind already working through de-escalation strategies that had been informed by his work with the Brennan family. Let me try to establish communication. Sometimes these situations are more about fear than anger. As Marcus approached the house, he could hear raised voices through the open windows. A teenage boy's voice, defensive but not disrespectful. Dad, I've thought this through. The military will give me training, education benefits, a chance to serve my country. The father's response was slurred but passionate. You're throwing your life away. You're smart enough for college, but instead you want to go get yourself killed in some foreign war. Marcus paused outside the front door, recognizing the same dynamic he'd encountered with Thomas Brennan, a parent's love expressing itself through fear and control, creating the very conflict it was trying to prevent. Mr. Patterson, Marcus called through the door, having been briefed on the family's name. I'm Deputy Kellerman with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. I'd like to talk with you about your son's decision. There's nothing to talk about. The father's voice carried through the door. My boy's making the biggest mistake of his life, and I'm not going to let it happen. Marcus thought about Emma's words from earlier that afternoon, about helping other families navigate similar crises. Mr. Patterson, I understand you're worried about your son's future. I've worked with other families facing similar decisions. Would you be willing to let me come in so we can discuss this? There was a long pause before the door opened slightly. Through the crack, Marcus could see a man in his 40s, disheveled and clearly intoxicated, clutching a wooden baseball bat. Behind him, a teenage boy sat on a couch, looking frightened, but determined. You got kids, Deputy? Patterson asked. I have a daughter, Marcus replied honestly. And I know how scary it can be when they make choices that feel risky to us as parents. Patterson's grip on the bat loosened slightly. Then you understand. Jason's got a full scholarship offer to Oregon State. Full ride, everything paid for. And he wants to throw it all away to go play soldier. Marcus could hear the pride mixed with fear in the father's voice. Pride in his son's academic achievements. Terror at the thought of losing him to military service. It was a complex emotional landscape that required careful navigation. Mr. Patterson, what if I told you that some of the best students I know have used military service as a way to mature and focus before starting college? What if Jason's decision isn't about throwing away his opportunities, but about earning them in a different way? The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus drawing on techniques he'd learned from his experience with Thomas Brennan, insights from Dr. Wilson's family therapy approaches, and wisdom gained from watching the Martinez Brennan family navigate generational differences with respect and understanding. Gradually, the crisis de-escalated. Patterson put down the baseball bat. Jason was able to explain his reasoning more fully. Most importantly, father and son began to listen to each other rather than simply defending their positions. By the time Marcus left the Patterson house, the family had agreed to spend the weekend researching military service options together, including programs that would allow Jason to serve while still pursuing his college degree. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a foundation for ongoing communication rather than continued conflict. As Marcus drove away from Maplewood Heights, he reflected on how dramatically his approach to such calls had evolved. 2 years ago, he might have focused primarily on removing weapons and ensuring immediate safety. Now he understood that lasting safety required addressing the underlying fears and communication breakdowns that created dangerous situations in the first place. The sun was setting as Marcus completed his shift paperwork and prepared to head to the Martinez-Brennan anniversary celebration. The dual occasion, commemorating the family's crisis and recovery while celebrating Thomas Roberto's second birthday, seemed to perfectly encapsulate the theme of transformation that had defined everyone's experience over the past 2 years. The celebration was being held at the family's new home, a spacious property in the foothills outside Cedar Falls that accommodated their expanded family network and frequent entertaining of friends and colleagues. As Marcus pulled into the driveway, he was struck by the scene that greeted him. The yard was filled with people of all ages, from toddlers to seniors, representing the diverse community that had grown around the Martinez-Brennan family. Thomas and Roberto were manning a barbecue grill, their easy friendship a testament to how completely their business partnership had evolved into genuine family bonds. Sarah and Maria Martinez were arranging food on picnic tables while discussing plans for Carmen's upcoming baby shower. Emma and Kevin moved through the crowd, introducing newer friends to longer-term family members, ensuring that everyone felt welcomed and included. Their ability to create community wherever they went had become one of their most remarkable qualities. But the center of attention was undoubtedly Thomas Roberto, who toddled from person to person with the confidence of a child who had never doubted that he was loved and celebrated by everyone around him. At 2 years old, he was already showing signs of the intelligence and determination that characterized both sides of his family. Uncle Marcus. The toddler's voice carried across the yard as he spotted the deputy. Thomas Roberto's face lit up with pure joy as he ran toward Marcus with the unsteady gait that made every step an adventure. Marcus scooped up the little boy, marveling at how much he'd grown since their last visit. "Happy birthday, buddy. Are you excited about your party? Cake," Thomas Roberto announced with the single-minded focus that characterized most 2-year-old conversations. Big cake, indeed. There was an impressive cake on the dessert table. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with both birthday candles and commemorative elements celebrating the family's journey. Emma had insisted on including symbols that represented each phase of their transformation. A house for their new home, graduation caps for educational achievements, wedding rings for the marriages that had strengthened their family bonds, and baby booties for the new generation that had brought them all together. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself in conversations that illustrated the far-reaching impact of the Brennan-Martinez family story. Dr. Wilson shared updates on other families she was counseling using techniques refined through her work with Thomas and Sarah. Janet Pierce described how the men's support group had expanded to include specialized sessions for fathers dealing with unexpected family changes. Several of Thomas's landscaping employees spoke about how their own second chances had been inspired by witnessing his transformation. Emma's tutoring students shared stories of academic achievements they'd accomplished with her encouragement and support. But perhaps most moving were the conversations with families who had been directly helped by Martinez-Brennan's willingness to share their story. Maria Santos's father, the man Emma had mentioned earlier that day, approached Marcus during dinner. "Deputy Kellerman, I wanted to thank you personally," he said with heavily accented English. "Emma told me what you did for her family 2 years ago. Because of your patience with her father, my daughter now has someone who understands what we're going through." Marcus was struck by the interconnectedness of it all, how one crisis intervention had created ripple effects that continued to expand. touching families he'd never met and situations he'd never directly encountered. As the formal dinner concluded and the evening moved toward cake and birthday celebrations, Thomas Brennan approached Marcus with an envelope in his hand. "Marcus, Emma and I wanted to give you something to mark this anniversary," Thomas said, his voice carrying the emotional weight of everything they'd shared over the past 2 years. Inside the envelope was a letter, written in Emma's careful handwriting but signed by the entire family. As Marcus read, he realized it was more than a thank you note. It was a reflection on how their crisis had become a catalyst for purpose and meaning that none of them had imagined possible. The letter described specific families they'd helped. Students who had graduated because of Emma's tutoring, men who had found employment through Thomas's mentoring, and children who were growing up in more stable homes because their parents had learned from the Martinez-Brennan example of choosing love over fear. "We wanted you to understand," Thomas said as Marcus finished reading, "that every life you helped save that day has gone on to help save other lives. The choice you made to see past my anger to the love underneath didn't just change our family. It started something that's still growing." As if summoned by the emotional moment, Thomas Roberto appeared at Marcus's side, holding up his arms in the universal toddler signal for "pick me up." As Marcus lifted the little boy, he was struck by the realization that this child represented the living embodiment of hope triumphing over despair, of second chances leading to new beginnings, and of families choosing to grow stronger through crisis rather than allowing it to destroy them. The celebration continued late into the evening, with stories shared, plans made for future gatherings, and commitments renewed to continue supporting each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. As Marcus prepared to leave, he was filled with gratitude for having been allowed to witness and participate in such a remarkable transformation. The drive home took him past the original Brennan house on Maple Street, now occupied by a young family who had no idea of the drama that had once unfolded there. The new residents had painted the shutters green and added a swing set in the backyard, creating their own version of domestic happiness on ground that had once nearly witnessed tragedy. As Marcus pulled into his own driveway, he reflected on the lesson that the Martinez-Brennan family had taught him about the power of perspective. What looked like an ending could actually be a beginning. What felt like failure could become the foundation for success. What seemed like the worst possible outcome could transform into the greatest opportunity for growth. His own daughter Melissa, now a sophomore in college studying veterinary medicine, had been profoundly influenced by her connection to Emma's story. The friendship between the two young women had taught both of them about resilience, planning for the future, and the importance of family support in achieving their dreams. Tomorrow would bring new emergency calls, new families in crisis, new opportunities to make the kinds of choices that could save or transform lives. Marcus felt more prepared for those challenges now, equipped with hard-won wisdom about the difference between immediate safety and lasting healing, between solving problems and empowering people to solve their own problems. The anniversary celebration had reminded him that police work at its best wasn't just about enforcing laws or preventing immediate harm. It was about helping people find their way back to their best selves, even in their darkest moments. Sometimes that meant using force, but more often it meant using patience, wisdom, and the kind of hope that could see possibilities even when circumstances looked hopeless. As Marcus settled into sleep that night, his last thoughts were of Thomas Roberto's laughter echoing across the yard, of Emma's confidence as she described her upcoming presentation to mental health professionals, of Thomas's pride in his expanding business and his role as a mentor to other struggling men, and of the entire extended family network that had grown around the choice to love each other through crisis rather than let crisis divide them. The story that had begun with a desperate man pointing a rifle at his pregnant daughter had become a testament to the transformative power of second chances, the importance of community support, and the remarkable capacity of families to emerge stronger from their darkest moments when they choose healing over harm, hope over despair, and love over fear. 5 years after that fateful October afternoon, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department was hosting its annual Community Service Awards ceremony at the Cedar Falls Civic Center. The auditorium buzzed with conversation as law enforcement officers, community leaders, and local families gathered to recognize outstanding contributions to public safety and community well-being. Deputy Marcus Kellerman, now a lieutenant after his recent promotion, sat at the head table reviewing his notes for the evening's keynote address. At 38, his temples showed traces of silver, and the lines around his eyes spoke of wisdom earned through years of serving families in crisis. Tonight's speech would be his most personal yet, a reflection on how one emergency call had fundamentally changed his understanding of what it meant to protect and serve. As the ceremony began, Marcus scanned the audience and found the faces that had become so familiar over the past 5 years. Thomas Brennan sat in the third row, his posture radiating the quiet confidence of a man who had found his purpose. Beside him, Sarah beamed with pride, her hand resting on the arm of her husband, who had evolved from a desperate, angry father into one of the community's most respected advocates for men in crisis. Kevin and Emma Martinez Brennan occupied the seats directly behind Thomas and Sarah, their 4-year-old son Thomas Roberto wiggling between them with the restless energy of a child who understood this was an important occasion, but couldn't quite grasp why everyone was sitting still for so long. Emma, now 23 and preparing to transfer to Portland State University to complete her veterinary degree, wore the serene expression of a young woman who had successfully balanced early motherhood with ambitious academic goals. The extended Martinez family filled the rest of the row. Roberto and Maria, whose landscaping empire now employed over 30 people across 3 Oregon counties. Carmen and Miguel Martinez with their twin daughters, 3-year-old Isabella and Sophia. And newest family member, Dr. Patricia Wilson, who had become so integral to the family's network that they'd adopted her as an honorary aunt. What struck Marcus most profoundly was seeing Janet Pierce sitting with the Martinez Brennan clan. The crisis negotiator who had arrived too late to help with the original standoff had become one of Thomas's closest friends and collaborators. Together, they now ran the most successful peer support program for unemployed fathers in the Pacific Northwest, having helped over 200 families navigate crises similar to the one that had nearly destroyed the Brennans. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Sheriff Patricia Donovan from the podium, "we gather tonight to recognize individuals whose actions have made our communities safer, stronger, and more compassionate. Our first award recognizes innovation in crisis intervention." Marcus watched as Thomas Brennan was called to the platform to receive the Community Leadership Award for his work with the Fathers in Transition program. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The man who had once been the subject of a crisis intervention was now being honored for preventing similar crises in other families. 5 years ago, Thomas began, his voice steady and clear, I was a man who had lost his way. Unemployment, financial stress, and fear for my family's future drove me to make choices that could have destroyed everything I loved. I pointed a loaded rifle at my pregnant 17-year-old daughter because I couldn't see past my own terror to understand that she was actually making brave, mature decisions about her future. The audience listened in rapt attention as Thomas continued, I'm standing here tonight not because I'm proud of what I did that day, but because I'm grateful for the people who saw past my worst moment to the man I could become. Deputy, now Lieutenant, Marcus Kellerman didn't just prevent a tragedy that afternoon. He helped me remember who I really was underneath all that pain and fear. Thomas paused, looking directly at Marcus. But more than that, he showed me that our worst moments don't have to define us. They can become the foundation for our greatest contributions to others. Every family I've helped over the past 5 years, every father I've counseled through unemployment and despair, every child who still has their dad because we provided support instead of judgment, They exist because Marcus chose to see possibilities, instead of just problems. The applause was thunderous, but Marcus found himself focused on Emma's face. She was crying, not from sadness, but from pride in her father's transformation and gratitude for the journey their family had traveled together. The next award was presented to Emma herself, receiving the Young Adult Achievement Award for her work with teenage parents completing their education. As she approached the podium with Thomas Roberto in her arms, the boy had refused to be separated from his mother during her big moment. Marcus marveled at her poise and confidence. "When I was 17 and found out I was pregnant," Emma began, "I thought my life was over. I thought I'd disappointed everyone, ruined my future, and destroyed my family's plans for me. What I learned is that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning, not just for you, but for everyone around you." She shifted Thomas Roberto to her hip as he played with the medal around her neck. "This little boy has taught our entire family that love multiplies when you share it. My pregnancy, which once seemed like a crisis, became the catalyst for the strongest, most supportive family network any child could hope for." Emma looked out at the audience, her gaze finding the faces of current students from her tutoring program. "To the young parents in the audience tonight, I want you to know that your dreams don't have to disappear because you're starting a family early. They might change shape, they might take longer to achieve, but they can become even more meaningful because you're pursuing them for more than just yourself." As Emma returned to her seat, Thomas Roberto waved enthusiastically at the audience, drawing chuckles and applause that spoke to how completely the child had won over everyone who knew him. The ceremony continued with several other awards, but Marcus found his attention drawn to a conversation taking place in the lobby during intermission. A young couple, probably in their early 20s, was speaking intensely with Emma and Kevin about their own unexpected pregnancy situation. Marcus couldn't hear the details, but he could see Emma's compassionate attention and Kevin's earnest engagement as they shared their own experience and offered practical advice. This had become a common occurrence wherever the Martinez-Brennan family went. Their story had spread throughout the region, and young couples facing similar challenges regularly sought them out for guidance and support. What had started as one family's private crisis had evolved into a community resource that continued to expand organically. Dr. Patricia Wilson approached Marcus during the intermission, her expression thoughtful. "Lieutenant Kellerman, I wanted to share something with you before your speech tonight. The case study we published about the Brennan family intervention has been cited in over 40 academic papers on family crisis resolution. Your approach that day has literally changed how law enforcement agencies across the country handle domestic situations involving family conflict." Marcus was struck by the reach of that single afternoon's work. "Dr. Wilson, I just did what felt right in the moment. I can't take credit for some revolutionary technique, but that's exactly the point," she replied. "What felt right to you was seeing Thomas as a father in pain rather than just a dangerous subject. You understood intuitively that lasting resolution required addressing the underlying fears, not just neutralizing the immediate threat. That perspective, that wisdom, is what we're now training crisis intervention specialists to embrace." As the ceremony resumed, Sheriff Donovan took the podium for the evening's final presentation. Tonight's Distinguished Service Award goes to an officer whose approach to family crisis intervention has not only saved lives in our community, but has influenced law enforcement practices nationwide. Lieutenant Marcus Kellerman's work demonstrates that true public safety isn't just about responding to emergencies. It's about understanding the human stories behind those emergencies and helping families find paths forward rather than simply preventing immediate harm. Marcus felt overwhelmed as he approached the podium to thunderous applause. Looking out at the audience, he saw faces that represented not just the Brennan Martinez family, but dozens of other families whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that October afternoon 5 years earlier. 5 years ago, Marcus began, I responded to what seemed like a routine domestic disturbance call. A man with a gun, a family in crisis, a situation that required immediate intervention. To prevent tragedy. What I discovered was that behind every crisis call is a human story. People who are struggling, scared, and in desperate need of hope rather than judgment. He paused, looking directly at Thomas and Emma. The Brennan family taught me that. Our role as law enforcement officers isn't just to enforce laws or maintain order. It's to see the possibilities for healing and growth, even in the darkest moments, and to help people find their way back to their best selves. Marcus went on to describe how his experience with the Brennan family had influenced his approach to every subsequent crisis call. He shared stories of other families helped using similar techniques. The Patterson family from 2 years earlier, who had successfully navigated their son's military service decision. The Rodriguez family, where teenage drug use had been addressed through understanding rather than punishment. The Chun family, whose cultural generational conflicts had been resolved through patient dialogue rather than authoritarian intervention. Each of these families taught me something new about the complexity of human relationships and the power of hope to transform seemingly impossible situations. Marcus continued. But they all trace back to lessons learned from Thomas, Sarah, Emma, and Kevin, lessons about seeing past anger to underlying love, about understanding that crisis can become catalyst, and about the importance of community support in helping families heal and grow stronger. As Marcus concluded his speech, Thomas Roberto suddenly broke free from his parents and ran toward the stage, his small arms outstretched toward his honorary godfather. The audience erupted in laughter and applause as Marcus scooped up the little boy, who had decided that the formal ceremony needed a more personal touch. Uncle Marcus. Thomas Roberto announced into the microphone with 4-year-old clarity, "Are you famous now?" The innocent question drew more laughter, but also provided Marcus with the perfect closing for his speech. "No, buddy, I'm not famous, but I'm grateful. Grateful for your family, grateful for the lessons you've all taught me, and grateful for the chance to help other families find their way to happiness the way yours did." As the ceremony concluded and people began to mingle, Marcus found himself surrounded by colleagues, community members, and families who had been helped by the programs and approaches that had grown out of the Brennan family intervention. The conversation was rich with stories of transformation, second chances, and the power of choosing love over fear. Emma approached with a manila folder in her hands. "Marcus, I have something for you. It's not an official award, but it might mean more than any ceremony." Inside the folder were letters, dozens of them, from families, students, and individuals whose lives had been changed by the Martinez-Brennan family story and the programs that had grown from it. There were thank you notes from teenage mothers who had completed their education, from fathers who had found employment through Thomas's networking, from children who were growing up in more stable homes because their parents had learned better communication skills. But the letter that moved Marcus most was from Maria Santos, the 16-year-old Emma had mentored 2 years earlier. Maria had not only graduated high school on time, but had been accepted to nursing school. Her letter included a photo of her with her 1-year-old daughter, both smiling radiantly, and a note that read, "Because Emma believed in me, I learned to believe in myself. Because you believed in her family, she was able to help mine." "This is incredible," Marcus said, overwhelmed by the scope of impact represented in the letters. "I had no idea our story had reached so many people." Kevin joined the conversation, carrying Thomas Roberto, who had grown tired from the evening's excitement. "Marcus, you have to understand, you didn't just save our family that day. You created a template for how families can survive crisis and emerge stronger. Every family we help, every student Emma tutors, every father Thomas mentors, they all exist because you chose to see possibilities instead of just problems." As the evening wound down and families began to head home, Marcus found himself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory his career had taken. What had started as routine police work had evolved into something much deeper, a calling to help families find healing and hope in their darkest moments. Thomas and Sarah approached him as he prepared to leave. "Marcus," Thomas said, "Sarah and I have been talking about something, and we wanted to run it by you." Sarah smiled and continued the thought. "We're thinking about writing a book, our family story, but also a guide for other families facing similar crises. We'd want you to co-author it with us, to share the law enforcement perspective on family crisis intervention." The idea intrigued Marcus. Over the years, he'd been invited to speak at conferences, train other officers, and consult on family crisis situations across the region. A book could reach even more families who might benefit from their story. What would we call it? Marcus asked. Emma overheard the conversation and immediately replied, "Take Me Instead: How Crisis Became Catalyst for One Family's Greatest Growth." The title was perfect, capturing both the desperate moment when Thomas had been willing to sacrifice himself for what he thought was his daughter's future, and the ultimate realization that true sacrifice meant supporting her choices rather than controlling them. As Marcus drove home that night, he passed the location where it all began. The house on Maple Street in Willowbrook. The current residents had added a garden and painted the fence white, creating their own version of domestic happiness. But Marcus would always remember it as the place where he learned that the most important part of police work wasn't enforcing laws or preventing immediate harm. It was helping people remember who they really were underneath their fear and pain. His radio crackled with a domestic disturbance call from the night shift. Somewhere in Riverside County, another family was facing a crisis that could destroy them or transform them, depending on the choices made in the next few hours. Marcus smiled as he listened to the younger officers responding to the call, knowing they'd been trained in techniques developed from his experience with the Brennan family. The legacy was continuing to grow, spreading outward in ripples that would touch families he'd never meet, in situations he'd never directly encounter. The story that had begun with a desperate father pointing a rifle at his pregnant daughter had become a testament to the transformative power of hope, the importance of seeing possibilities even in impossible situations, and the remarkable capacity of families to choose love over fear when given the support and encouragement they needed to make that choice. As Marcus pulled into his driveway, he thought about tomorrow's plans. He would visit the Patterson family to check on Jason's progress in his military career and college studies. He would stop by Martinez Brennan Landscaping to see the latest expansion project. He would attend Thomas Roberto's soccer game, where the 4-year-old would undoubtedly provide more entertainment value than athletic prowess. But most importantly, he would wake up knowing that his work had meaning beyond immediate crisis response. That every family crisis call was an opportunity to plant seeds of hope that could grow into something beautiful, if nurtured with patience, wisdom, and the unshakable belief that even the darkest moments could become foundations for the brightest new beginnings. The stars were brilliant in the clear October sky as Marcus settled into sleep, grateful for the journey that had taught him the true meaning of protect and serve. Sometimes protection meant removing immediate threats, but more often it meant protecting people's capacity to love each other through crisis. Sometimes service meant enforcing laws, but more often it meant serving families' deepest need to heal, grow, and become stronger together. The story that had begun with, "Take Me Instead, My Daughter's Pregnant," had become a testament to the truth that the most powerful interventions weren't about taking anyone's place, but about helping everyone find their way to the place where love could triumph over fear, where hope could overcome despair, and where families could choose to write new chapters together rather than allowing crisis to end their story. In the quiet of his bedroom, Marcus could almost hear Thomas Roberto's laughter echoing from the evening ceremony, a sound that represented pure joy growing from ground that had once nearly been watered with tragedy. It was the sound of healing, of second chances fulfilled, of a family that had chosen love over fear and found that love really could conquer all, not through fairy tale magic, but through the hard daily work of supporting each other through both crisis and celebration. The crisis had ended 5 years ago, but the love story was still being written, one choice at a time, one family at a time, one moment of hope at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.